He trusted his wife completely until the day she betrayed him. Ryvan had always believed that love, when given genuinely, should be simple. Not perfect, not without flaws, but honest enough to stand through anything. He was not the kind of man who played games with emotions, and he never saw relationships as something to be tested or manipulated. To him, love was a commitment, something you chose every single day, even when it became difficult. When Soraya came into his life, everything about that belief felt confirmed. She was calm in a way that balanced his quiet nature, gentle without being weak, and attentive in ways that made him feel understood without having to explain himself too much. Their connection was not loud or dramatic, but it was deep, steady, and comfortable. It was the kind of love that did not need constant validation because it simply existed, naturally and peacefully. Their marriage reflected that same energy. There were no constant arguments, no unnecessary tension, no moments that made people question what they had. They moved through life like two people who genuinely chose each other, sharing routines, laughter, and even silence in a way that felt complete. To anyone watching from the outside, they were what many people hoped to have someday. Ryvan built his life around that belief. Every decision he made, every plan he created, had Soraya in it. He trusted her not just as a partner, but as someone who held equal responsibility in protecting what they had built together. In his mind, betrayal was not something that could exist in a space like theirs, because what they had felt too real to be broken in such a way. But what Ryvan did not understand at the time was that betrayal does not always begin with something obvious. It does not announce itself or arrive in a way that demands immediate attention. Sometimes, it begins quietly, hiding behind normal behavior, blending into everyday life until it becomes something too deep to ignore. The first signs were small enough to dismiss. Soraya began spending more time on her phone, which did not seem unusual at first. Everyone had conversations, work messages, or distractions that required attention. It was easy to overlook, easy to excuse, and even easier to ignore completely. But over time, the pattern changed. The way she looked at her phone became different. It was no longer casual or absent-minded. There was intention in it, a kind of focus that separated her from whatever was happening around her. She smiled more at her screen than she did during conversations with him, and sometimes she would quickly lock her phone when he came too close, as if protecting something that was not meant to be seen. Ryvan noticed all of it, but he said nothing. Not because he was unaware, but because he trusted her enough to believe there had to be a reasonable explanation. He convinced himself that he was overthinking, that there was no need to create problems where none existed. It was easier to protect the image of what they had than to question it, and risk discovering something he was not ready to face. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the emotional distance between them became more noticeable. It was not something that could be pointed out directly, but it could be felt in the way conversations became shorter, in the way laughter became less frequent, and in the way their connections slowly started to feel one-sided. Soraya was still present physically, still playing her role as a wife, still maintaining the routines that made everything appear normal. But emotionally, she was no longer as engaged as she used to be. There was a shift in her attention, a quiet withdrawal that left Ryvan feeling like he was holding on to something that was gradually slipping away. He tried, in his own way, to reconnect. He asked simple questions, created moments for them to spend time together, and even ignored the discomfort he felt just to maintain peace. But every attempt seemed to meet a subtle resistance, as if there was a part of her that was no longer available to him. The moment that changed everything came in the simplest way possible. They were sitting together one evening, both present but not truly connected, with the television playing in the background. It was one of those quiet nights that should have felt comfortable but instead carried an unexplainable tension. Then her phone buzzed. She picked it up quickly, almost instinctively, but not quickly enough to stop him from seeing what appeared on the screen. It was not just the message itself, but the tone of it. "I wish you didn't have to leave this morning." That single sentence carried a weight that could not be misunderstood. It was not something casual, not something that could be easily explained away as a normal conversation. It suggested familiarity, intimacy, and a shared experience that had nothing to do with him. Riven felt something shift inside him at that moment. Not anger, not even immediate heartbreak, but a quiet realization that something he had trusted completely might not be what he thought it was. When he asked her about it, her response came too quickly, too smoothly. She said it was someone from work. And just like that, she tried to reduce something that felt significant into something ordinary. Riven did not argue. He did not press further. He simply accepted the answer outwardly, even though something inside him refused to settle. That night, sleep became impossible. Not because he was overwhelmed with emotion, but because his mind kept returning to that moment, replaying it over and over again, searching for a version of it that made sense. By morning, he had made a decision. He would not confront her without certainty. He needed to know the truth, not just suspect it. Days later, when Soraya mentioned she had somewhere important to be, something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. It was not the words themselves, but the delivery, the slight hesitation, the lack of natural flow that made it feel constructed rather than genuine. That was when Riven decided to follow her. It was not an easy decision, and it was not one he made lightly. But at that point, the need for clarity outweighed the comfort of ignorance. He watched as she left, maintaining a distance that allowed him to observe without being noticed. She did not go to any workplace. She did not meet with colleagues. Instead, she walked into a hotel. That moment removed any remaining doubt. Still, Riven remained in his car for a long time, staring at the entrance, trying to process what he already knew but had not yet fully accepted. He understood that once he stepped out of that car and walked into that building, there would be no turning back. Whatever he found inside would define everything that came after. Eventually, he stepped out. Each movement felt heavier than the last, as if his body was resisting the truth his mind was already preparing for. By the time he reached the door of the room, he was no longer hoping to be wrong. He opened it, and in that moment, everything became undeniable. Soraya was there, standing in a reality that no longer included him in the way it once did. And the man with her was Tavian, someone Riven had trusted deeply, someone he had considered close enough to call family. There were no words exchanged in that moment that could change what had already been seen. There was no explanation that could repair what had been broken. Riven did not react in the way most people would expect. He did not shout or demand answers. He simply looked, understood, and walked away. Because sometimes the truth is so clear that it leaves no room for discussion. The days that followed were not filled with confrontation or chaos. Instead, they were quiet, almost unsettlingly so. Riven chose not to address the situation immediately. Not because he was avoiding it, but because he wanted to end it in a way that left no confusion, no denial, and no room for manipulation. He planned something simple but final. A gathering. He invited both families, creating an environment that felt normal and safe, masking the reality of what was about to unfold. When everyone was present, when the room was filled with laughter and conversation, he stood up and calmly announced that he had something to share. What followed was not dramatic in delivery, but it was devastating in impact. The truth, once revealed, did not need exaggeration. It spoke for itself. Soraya's reaction was immediate, a collapse under the weight of exposure. Tavian could not meet anyone's eyes, his silence speaking louder than any defense he could have offered. And Riven, standing there, remained composed. Not because he felt nothing, but because he had already processed everything. His final words were not loud or aggressive. They were simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. He told her he had given her everything, and in return, she had given him betrayal. And with that, he walked away. Not out of weakness, but out of understanding. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to betrayal is not revenge, not anger, but the decision to leave and never look back. In the end, Riven did not just lose a wife. He lost a version of his life he once believed in. But in doing so, he gained something far more important: the clarity to choose himself.